Spring game is in the books for Alabama. The A-Day spring game, spring scrimmage, whatever you want to call it, last Saturday at Bryant-Denny Stadium. 72,000 were on hand to watch the unofficial unveiling of the Kalen DeBoer era. And just like every other spring game across the country, except maybe the Ole Miss spring game, which wasn't really actually a football game, everybody looks good. Everybody looks healthy. Everybody looks stronger. People are buying into the process. People are buying into the culture. Things are looking up. Right, guys? I'm Cody Goodwin here. Welcome to Roll Pod. Hey, what's up? Hello, guys. We're back to recap A-Day here with Bama 247. I'm here with Alex Scarborough and Mike Rodak. And guys, everything is good and hunky-dory in Tuscaloosa after A-Day, right?
Yeah. Somebody asked me on the radio this morning, could this transition have gone any smoother? And I'm like, I guess, but at the same time, no matter what happened, there's going to be a football team, there's going to be coaches, there's going to be players, there's still going to be an A-Day. So, it was going to be what it was going to be, no matter what. So, yeah, I think it's stabilized a little bit. We'll have to see what the portal does in the coming days. But, I think the vibes are pretty good coming off of A-Day. I think people are probably a little bit confused by the format, including us. It's still, you're looking down at the point totals there for the defense, trying to figure out what each drive gets, and hopefully that's the last year of that, just because it's conceptually something you have to think about a little bit more than just the traditional one side scores, the other side scores sort of football game.
Yeah, we'll know how good the vibes are judging when the portal opens and what that looks like in terms of players coming and going. But I do think overall it's pretty solid. You start with the most important player on the team, Jalen Milroe. He's happy. That sort of sets the tone, and then some guys really showed out, and we'll get into specific positions and things like that. But overall, pretty good. You had one significant injury in terms of Jalen Hale, but to get out of it without a lot of it, and that was something Kalen DeBoer stressed a couple of different times, talking to us, taking care of each other. So I think overall it's probably a pretty positive spring, but given the timeline of the way the transition went down, the fact that they came in late, I don't know how you grade it on an A to F scale, but I think overall it's pretty good. It could have been a lot worse. I know that much.
I know that it's just fun to, when you look around the country at all the other spring camps and spring games and practices and whatnot, everybody's healthier, everybody's happier, everybody's excited, hand out all the national championship trophies that you can possibly get. Has anybody ever had a bad spring? Not, Jalen Hale obviously didn't have the best spring here in Tuscaloosa, but I feel like it's just nothing but good vibes every spring. And maybe this is part of me just, coming in late because I had to cover the men's basketball team going to the Final Four. So I actually didn't get as much spring as you guys did, but does anybody come out of spring thinking, oh boy, fall's going to be rough, right? I don't think anybody thinks that.
No, there'll be some coaches in the building that feel that way in some places, but they're not going to say it.
Right. Yeah. It's always a good time of year. And same thing with fall camp or training camp in the NFL. It's always, everything starts off as everybody's 0-0 and they're going to win and everything's fine. And then reality hits at some point for half the league, just like reality will hit for half the SEC by October. So, we'll have to see what happens then. But yeah, I think they go into the summer feeling pretty good. I think certainly better than you're better on April 15th than you were on January 15th. I think if you're a fan, you're feeling better about where things are at.
Yeah, 72,000 plus were on hand to watch A-Day on Saturday, where the offense beat the defense 34-28. We can discuss the format maybe a little bit, but this was kind of the culmination, obviously, of Alabama spring practices, the 15th spring practice. So we won't see them really again until July at SEC Media Days. There might be a couple of guys who host some camps here and there that we may be able to go talk to, but this is the last bit of Alabama football that we'll get for quite a little bit. So I figured it's a good chance for us to kind of take a step back, reset, look at maybe what we learned, if anything at all, from A-Day. I know one of the big things that we knew going in was that we're not going to learn all things. We might learn some things. So we'll talk about some of those things that we learned. And then maybe, kind of what does that mean for, the things that maybe we learned throughout the spring practices and kind of what we know now, if we know anything better at all heading into the off season. So kind of what we did in the fall. when we recapped every single Alabama game. Just kind of, I'll throw it out to you guys. What was maybe the biggest takeaway you took from, A-Day, watching the, basically 2-hour scrimmage? What was kind of the biggest thing that stuck out to either of you guys?
I'll go real big picture. The put 72,000 in air quotes because it wasn't really 72,000. I mean, I'm not good at counting. That's why I'm a journalist. But I've been in that stadium a lot of times, and I don't think it was that number. But I still think it was good. I still think they were in the 50 to 60 range, and I think the turnout, the positivity, the wrapping their arms around a new coaching staff and a new program, and sort of pushing them off in the right way. I do think that matters. I think getting a couple commitments matters. So getting to see, excuse me, Nick Saban again, talking about being a fan, getting to see the way he was interacting with recruits on that uh, the captain ceremony, seeing maybe what that looks like moving forward, right? What his involvement is like with the program, and then Kalen DeBoer. It really felt like it kind of all sunk in for him, being his first time in Bryant Denny Stadium with that number of fans in there, having Nick Saban talk to the team for the first time since January. So it kind of all became real in a sense. And I know spring and it's barely a game, but I think this sense of, okay, we're off and running now. I think that's kind of how I walked away from it. And just the overlay, all like, okay, the turnout was good. They're ready to see what the newness looks like, and we can get into the details of it. But big picture, I think it was a pretty positive send off into the real off season.
I like that.
And yeah, I think big picture for me too, because I think sometimes we lose sight. If you're like, oh, we're talking about football last season, and all of a sudden we're just talking about football again on the spring game on A-Day. We kind of forgot everything that happened in between. Like there's been a seismic, significant change around the building, not just with Nick Saban, but there's a lot of other people that are gone, and a lot of new people in place, players and coaches and staff. So it's hard to ignore that. And it's hard to ignore Nick Saban, walking down the tunnel and not being the head coach of Alabama and standing on the sideline and waving to the crowd and walking behind you in the press box. And, it just is so different, and still trying to wrap your head around that. It's hard to just kind of brush that under the rug and be like, let's just focus on the X's and O's in the football. Which I think, Kalen DeBoer's done a good job of keeping his team in that frame of mind, but just as an observer, like it's hard to miss the obvious. And yeah, I agree with Alex. Like it seems, like things stabilize, you're off and running. Like I think those things are all true. I think it helps that it was a beautiful 80-degree day in terms of the crowd. I think if it was like some recent years, I think last year maybe, where there was storms and rain around, it probably wouldn't have been the same crowd. And that's, just kind of the circumstances either way. Look, even Kentucky, like you saw that they had that big ceremony for Mark Pope and the 1996 captains, and this new coach who comes in, and they pack Rupp Arena, and there's all these positive vibes around Mark Pope. It's good. Like it's good that the fans are embracing a new coach, whether it's at Alabama or Kentucky. I don't know if that guarantees that Mark Pope's going to be successful at Kentucky. I don't think it guarantees that Kalen DeBoer is going to be successful at Alabama, but it does alleviate some of the doubts or the questions. And there was certainly a lot around Kentucky, and there probably was a lot around Kalen DeBoer when he was first hired too. Like there's people who thought Alabama could just go out and get Kirby Smart to come, or Steve Sarkisian, or whoever. Like they could just pick their coach, and that didn't happen. And people didn't really know Kalen DeBoer, and they said, there's this Pac-12 guy who's not going to succeed in the SEC and in the South. And that all seemed like a distant memory, on Saturday with the crowd there, and the same music is playing and the same uniforms, and everything just kind of fell back into place that way. So again, it's kind of the dichotomy of it's still the same game, sort of the format. It's still the same stadium, still the same fans, but it just still seems so much different seeing Nick Saban again walk through the press box during a game when just never would have happened before.
Yeah. And I think that's, that transition from Saban to DeBoer, this new era of Alabama football. you know, kind of like it's interesting that this is kind of the last taste that people are going to get to see, like last kind of big thing for us until, you know, July at SEC Media Days. Like that's, you know, we got to see it finally. And kind of like you said, like it looks a lot of the same, but also there was some, and we'll get into this, some little things that were maybe different, right? Like we were joking in the press box that the game day format, offense versus defense, seemed to favor the offense a little bit more, right? And DeBoer is an offensive guy, right? Like Saban wouldn't have stood for this. Like he would have, you know, wanted to see ones versus twos, twos versus twos, ones, you know, twos versus ones, that sort of thing. You know, two actual teams, like they're, you know, whereas like DeBoer is like, yeah, let's just throw them out there and it's more or less a scrimmage and we'll learn what we learn. You know, I think the biggest takeaway for me was probably a little bit more X's and O's related, just because, you know, I was busy doing the basketball thing. So when I come here, it's like, oh yeah, like let's watch actual football. It wasn't actual football. And like I said, we're not going to learn all things, but we did learn some things. There were some things that I don't know. Like I was like, okay, like there's some stuff here. And we were talking before we hit record, you know, like the secondary, for example. We'll talk about these guys in a little bit more depth here in a minute. There's some stuff there with some of the younger guys, the receivers. There's some stuff there that, you know, like Jeremy Bernard, for example, Cole Adams, like a couple guys that we saw. The quarterbacks, obviously, we'll touch on here in a minute. Personally, yeah, like I acknowledge that you know, this is the first unofficial thing with Kalen DeBoer, and that's an important thing to acknowledge and to, you know, hey, like this is a thing that's happened and it feels real now. But I was also excited just to watch some ball. So that's, you know, even if it wasn't actually ball. So I guess with that, we can transition to, you know, the game day was, again, offense versus defense. The offense won the spring game, won in air quotes, right? In terms of the actual X's and O's and the performance on the field with the offense, what was one thing that maybe you guys liked about the way Alabama's offense performed in the scrimmage on Saturday? Alex, we'll start with you.
Yeah, to me, it was kind of a tale of two halves, even though we didn't know when the half actually started and ended. But, you know, that's the format. The offense started out really strong, I thought, and then kind of tailed off. And maybe that's, again, the defense picks it up and maybe they're not playing as much vanilla defense and that sort of changes things. But I think overall, big picture with the offense, it was the quarterback play and seeing. Look, I know what Jalen Milroe is capable of, so I'm not going to lose sleep over 3 of 9 passing, or whatever it ended up being. There were some drops in there that I think might portend some issues with the receivers. But seeing Ty Simpson not just make plays, but just the overall command of the offense that he showed, moving around in the pocket, throwing off platform, never looking panicked, even when pressure was around him. He had one pass that I think he wished he would have had back where it was near interception. The guy was out of bounds. But just seeing that this guy has taken control of what the quarterback 2 position is going to be, the backup to Milroe. Maybe he pushes him down the line. I don't know. But I was surprised, and I think for Alabama fans in a good way, that you can now feel confident that not only is this the guy, but if they need to call on him in a certain situation, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. I think he's going to be at least serviceable, if not better than that. This is the guy we thought could have pushed Jalen Milroe a year ago. And I think a lot has happened between now and then to make it not really a competition. But this is the guy who I think Alabama recruited, the guy they believed in, and you're starting to see the confidence that he's able to play with. That was the big thing that stuck out to me.
I'll say it. He looked good. He looked really good.
Yeah.
You know, he started 1 of 4. And then he hit what I think it was 6 in a row at one point. Like he was navigating the pocket, he was feeling the pressure, stepping up. You know, he looked comfortable, he looked confident. Again, we're talking about a scrimmage here, so like whatever. But he looked like he knew what he was doing and he felt good out there. And like he was making deep passes, he was making passes over the middle, he was taking the short stuff. You know, he tried to do some RPO stuff there, but Zabian Brown stopped him for a sack, even though he tried to spin out of it. And, you know, bro, you're wearing the black jersey, just, you know, don't do anything crazy. But like he looked good, like he looked confident. And like it kind of gets to the idea that, you know, we have been talking about loosely on and off throughout the spring that like, hey, there could be a quarterback thing here, right? Like, is there a battle here? And more, it's like, okay, like the coaching staff clearly sees something in Ty Simpson. And it was good to, you know, see that they saw something in him on Saturday. Like they let him do all sorts of different stuff. They let Milroe do all sorts of different stuff too, but he was kind of, more or less relying on a lot of the big play stuff. And obviously we got to see a lot of the running backs, but he looked good. He looked really good. Mike, you got any thoughts on Simpson, or what was maybe your biggest takeaway from the offense, or the biggest thing you liked about the offense?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched the first half so far here on Monday morning. I haven't watched the second half yet of Simpson to kind of get a deeper look. And you're right. Like, he started a little bit shaky. He had that throw behind CJ Dupree in the end zone. There was another one that was over Emmanuel Henderson on a crossing route that he should have hit. It was just kind of a soft zone and was right over the middle.
He had the deep one too that Bray Hubbard almost picked off near the goal line, but he ran into
bad decision. So. And the thing I like about Ty is that this is the third spring game that we watched of him now. It seems like he's been here forever. Is like he was very quick to take off his first couple spring games, his first kind of times being out there, and it was always like first read wasn't there, boom, he'd take off and run. Like he wanted to run. We're still seeing some of that running, that mobility from him, but I think he's doing a better job of keeping his eyes downfield, going down to his second or third read. I think he's still a little bit overconfident in the pocket, trying to move around. There's a time, he's turning his back to the field and trying to run around defenders. And I don't know if that's his game. Like, I think if defenses get Ty Simpson into doing that, they're going to feel pretty good. I think it's his arm that's going to be the biggest threat, so him staying in the pocket. There was other passes I thought were pretty good, like down the seam. I forgot exactly who it was. Might have been Cole Adams. Down the right seam. That was a really good pass. And had another one, I think it was Kobe Prentice, or maybe that was Milroe over the middle. The Prentice going to the left. But it's the quarterback play was pretty good. I don't think it was overwhelming. Even the deep ball, that the 52-yarder to Bernard wasn't all that deep of a pass from Milroe. It was just bad coverage from Xavier Brown, and then Bernard had a pretty good run after it. And we saw the receivers. This is, if you want to talk about biggest takeaway, this offense is going to be complex. Like, there's a lot of motions. There was even a few plays I was standing there with Alex. It was like 2 tight ends go in motion, running back goes in motion, and then they have the receiver going in motion for an end around. And I think we're going to see a lot of that stuff. Maybe if you don't have the big play threat at receiver, if you don't have a quarterback that you feel like you necessarily win the game with his arm, maybe you try to get creative with the receivers. And I think we will see that with Kendrick Law in a lot of those end arounds. And he had a big one on Saturday. We saw it with Cole Adams. We saw it with Emmanuel Henderson, where they're going to try to get the receivers in space, maybe not through the passing game, but through the running game. And just, again, a lot of motions, a lot of looks, a lot of formations, a lot of different things that might not be a traditional passing game. But it still worked. It worked pretty well. Again, against a vanilla defense that maybe hadn't seen some of that stuff or is expecting it. But that's my biggest takeaways. I think this offense is going to be a little bit more complex, a little bit deeper of a playbook. And we'll just have to see how some of these guys execute that, because there's some veterans on the offense, but there's also going to be, some pretty inexperienced players as well.
Yeah, I don't know how deep they got into the playbook, but I was pleasantly surprised to see the fluidity of the offense in terms of not having a ton of penalties. And not having, we saw it last year where there were false starts galore. And look, I understand it's a different environment. The pressure is not the same. The noise is not the same. But they look like they knew what they were doing. The execution maybe wasn't always there all the time, but it didn't look like they picked this offense up a month ago, which in some ways they kind of did, right? So I was, in terms of how far along they are in terms of grasping the offense, I felt better coming out of the game because it wasn't a mess, which anytime you have a big transition like this, there's a potential for that.
Yeah, no, the offense looked, for the most part, very competent, right? Whether it was running the ball, like Jam Miller, averaged 10 yards a carry, but also Kendrick Law had an end around. I think later in the scrimmage, like, talking 14, 15, 16th drive, like Bubba Hampton, true freshman, who's a dog, right? Like, he was getting in on a couple of in arounds. Justice Haynes, Richard Young, Jam Miller all scored touchdowns. Richard Young had some really, really tough running. Like he runs some pretty good yards. I think 7 attempts, 30 yards about, or, Daniel Hill, true freshman, who, maybe I'm personally super excited about, got quite a bit of run there, both, as a receiver and as a rusher. So, I think, if anything, maybe one big thing really stuck out to me, like, honestly, like it was the quarterback's willingness to go back to Cole Adams. Like that was, that was a receiver that we had kind of, thought of as like, okay, like this is kind of a reliable guy, higher floor guy that maybe if he's able to get out there and show some stuff, maybe he could push for a little bit more playing time in the fall. Like, yeah, I mean, he ended up with 3 catches for 46 yards. Like he was kind of the reliable guy in the slot. And it was, in addition to the 3 catches, I want to say he had 2 or 3 other targets throughout the game. Like Milroe was throwing at him, Simpson was throwing at him, Lonergan was throwing at him. Like he was, clearly this guy has built a rapport with every single quarterback. And he's got reliable hands. Like I thought that was really impressive. I know Jeremy Bernard kind of stole the show with a couple of his big passes or big passing plays, right? And everybody was super excited about Caleb Odom, and I know people were kind of worried about, okay, what's the Jalen Hale replacement gonna look like? Cole Adams looked pretty solid to me, man. Like I know that's not like the biggest thing, but like just one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm gonna take that note down, file it away. If we see more of him in the fall, we'll understand why. So there was, but I think overall the competence of the offense was a very encouraging thing to see. And it also makes sense, right? When you think about DeBoer and his history and just offensive coordinator, specifically quarterbacks and offensive line coach, like that was, even if the defense was vanilla, the fact that the offense was able to execute the way that it did, I thought that was really encouraging. What was one thing we did not like about the offense from A-Day? Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the receiving depth and just the overall receiving position is still a little bit of a question mark, probably more than it wasn't. I think the Hale injury plays into that, but we haven't seen Ryan Williams. That's kind of the caveat. It's if Ryan Williams comes in and is the real deal right away and is as advertised and can step right in and play a pretty big role, then I think they're going to be okay. But again, I think you might have to manufacture a little bit with the running game and the receivers and the end arounds. I just don't know because of the combination of kind of Milroe's deficiencies in that area. And I think the receiving position doesn't really have that down the field threat. I think defenses in the SEC can kind of shut down that passing game pretty well and feel pretty good about their chances. So again, we saw a little bit of that passing game. The Milroe throw to Bernard towards the end zone was pretty good. The Milroe throw over Xavier Brown, it worked. There's a couple others here and there, but it wasn't as if they were lighting the field up. And this was a secondary that we're talking about coming in, having, freshmen at corner and I really haven't played together. Damani Jackson is new and Keon Sabb is new. And, maybe you expect a little bit more in terms of the passing game. So that would be one area. And, I felt probably better about the offensive line. But again, you put this offensive line against Georgia's front in September 28th, like that's still a pretty big ask. So I don't know. We'll see. There's probably multiple areas of concern still. I don't know if there's one that's like overwhelmingly glaring at this point.
Yeah. I think it was Deontay Lawson after the game that was like, we're used to sending pressure. They didn't send hardly any pressure on Saturday, which was, it was a by design thing. I mean, one, they kind of wanted to let the offense operate a little bit to see what the defense could do. And then on top of that, you don't want to put too much, fun stuff on spring game tape because those other coaches are going to be watching, right? Like that's just, maybe a psycho SEC thing. Alex, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'm withholding judgment on the offensive line because I think it could look very different by the time we get to week one. Obviously, Caden Proctor, who was on hand, I wasn't really prepared to see that he was on the side, not on the sidelines, but in the stadium. Then you wonder if Parker Brailsford comes back, if he's able to push to get some playing time, how they reshape that unit. But I'm with Mike. I think if you're looking for one area that you kind of felt underwhelming, it was the receiver group. Look, I'm really high on Jeremy Bernard. I think he has the potential to be one of the better receivers in the SEC. He's got big playability and can hurt you from all levels of the field. But who's the guy behind him? I thought Saturday was going to be an opportunity for a Caleb Odom, maybe an Emmanuel Henderson, somebody to show that I can be the second, third, fourth guy. I can be the guy who stretches the field vertically. And it didn't really happen. You feel good about the depth in a Kobe Prentice and a Kendrick Law, but those guys haven't yet shown that they can be real threats, guys that keep defensive coordinators up at night. So, and then you layer on top of that the drops. I mean, we've been looking at it for 3 years now, 2-3 years now, where it's happening too frequently. And you got to wonder, can they get that cleaned up? And if they're not confident in that, does that mean when the portal opens up and there's a guy who can make some plays that they kick the tires and see, is this someone we can bring in? Because we know in Kalen DeBoer's offense that it's the more the merrier at receiver. I mean, if you can make plays, come here and you're going to make some plays. So I'm very curious to see if there's somebody who presents himself that might be an option, because I think that's the important part. I don't think they have to just go get anybody. I think they do have enough numbers there that they feel like maybe they can develop. But if there's a guy with some experience, maybe a guy who can stretch the field in the way that you were hoping with Jalen Hale, I could see them going that route, because it's just too much unknown there. And then on Saturday, it didn't really make you feel that much better, even though I think in Caleb Odom's case specifically, you kind of have to just say, look, most of the spring, you hear really good things. Let's just hold out hope that maybe it's just one game and it's not the end of the world. But I do think the receiver room has some questions to answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. And I'm with you guys also reserving judgment on the offensive line, but I will say second team offensive line group was mostly true freshman Joseph Ionata at center. A lot of off target snaps. Hate to bring back those bad vibes, because there was I think there was a high one that Simpson was able to snag and Richard Young turned it into a touchdown. But I think I counted a ton of low snaps. I think 6, 7, 8, 9 ish. Not what you want to see. It's also spring ball. So if there's a time to do it, it's probably now. And if there's a guy to do it, it's probably the true freshman. But didn't like it. Would like to just see them shore that up. You would think after the way last season ended and how a lot of last season ultimately transpired that would be a point of emphasis. It probably is. It will probably continue to be. And again, this is mostly from the true freshman, who we're of the belief that will probably be third string center.
You'll never be snapping to Jalen Morrow this season. That's the good part about all this.
Right. Yeah. So that's, that's the caveat of I don't know if I'm just conditioned to look for the low or off target snaps now, but just I saw enough of it to be like, well, they ran 85 plays and 10 of them were off target. And it's you don't like that. You don't like to see that. The defense, a lot to dig into when it comes to the defense, just in terms of roster management and the depth chart and who's where and who could get, earn more playing time, earn more snaps. The defense ultimately settled in. They gave up points on their first 5 drives on A-Day, and then they settled in with, I think, 5 consecutive 3-and-outs. Ultimately, I think finished with 7 3-and-outs, maybe 7 or 8 3-and-outs, and was able to gather a few points by forcing a punt, forcing a 4th down stop. The game day format was not tilted in the defense's favor. I know we were joking about that, but also combine that with the fact that they were playing kind of vanilla and maybe a little hard to take away some things from the way the defense played. But Alex, I'll start with you this time. What did you like about what you saw from the defense on A-Day? If you liked anything,
a lot of plays were made by a lot of different people. I like that it wasn't a one-man show where Malachi Moore is just dominating and everybody else is sitting there watching. It was hard to get a grasp of it, though, right? Because it's just the format wasn't in their favor. What they were running defensively wasn't in their favor. I like the guys were mostly in position, but I still think there's a lot of room for improvement on that side of the ball. A lot of learning left to be done on that side of the ball, and a lot of reshaping to be done, frankly, in terms of the portal. Very curious to see what they do there, but felt good about it. Not great overall. That's why it's hard for me to pick one spot in particular and say, oh, this is the good thing, because the secondary still has a lot of work to do. The linebackers didn't really meet total expectations, and the defensive line was mostly just okay. But again, when you're not sending pressure, those guys aren't going to shine. So still, to me, in terms of just not learning enough, not necessarily bad or good thing, just didn't learn enough from the defense.
I think that's totally fair. Mike, did you learn anything from watching the defense on A-Day?
Well, like I said, I still have not gotten a chance to watch the second half, to rewatch it, I should say. So that's really where the defense had a better go of it. So in terms of the first half of the game, there's not a lot. And I haven't, there's a few Justin Okoronkwo highlights that probably, meet the standard of things that I like on defense, but there was a lot of big gaps in the running game that were pretty noticeable. Deontay Lawson, I thought, took a bad angle or a bad gap on one of Jam Miller's big runs. Thought the interior of the defensive line didn't look great on some of those big runs, whether it was Tim Smith or Tim Keenan. I saw Damon Payne getting pushed back, at the goal line. I thought the pass rush wasn't really there. I can remember a couple years ago, Will Anderson would just come into the spring game and just blow up whoever was in front of him. And it was almost like Nick Saban had to take Will Anderson out of the spring game just to make it fair. Just like you can have a competitive spring game where like other people can do things. Like otherwise it was just Will Anderson in the backfield the entire day. This is a far cry from that. Like they do not have obviously a Will Anderson type, but they don't have a Dallas Turner type. I don't think they have a Chris Braswell type. I think Quandarius Robinson is underwhelming in that Wolf role. This is his 5th year. He kind of is what he is. He's been mostly a special teams guy to this point. I don't think he's going to be a twitchy pass rusher. I don't think he's going to be that sort of player for him. There was even a time where I don't think he set the edge in the running game very well. Keanu Cott, I don't think really, and he probably has more athletic upside as a pass rusher. I don't think he really showed up. That other pass rushing spot is Jamarian Latham. He had that one pressure, but it just doesn't feel like if you're an offensive coordinator in the SEC, you're going to be kept up that week thinking about Jamarian Latham and Quandarius Robinson. You were last year with Braswell and Turner and Boygby, certainly by the end of the year. So that's a difference, and that's a little bit concerning, and that's kind of a sneaky area of need if there is a pass rusher out there. And I have some younger guys like Rousseau and Pierre that could potentially get into that. Keeley is still this is the first time we've seen him. I don't think he flashed.
He didn't really flash. Yeah.
And that's a guy who's a top 10 prospect. And, he's been here for over a year now, or almost a year now. He was a summer enrollee last year. So, the secondary, maybe talking about positives, I think didn't look as bad as you would think, given kind of the, again, the turnover and all that, and the younger players. And there wasn't like these big mental breakdowns where the field, you had a wide open receiver. Heck, we saw that with Nick Saban's defense at times. Like that happened with better players and more experienced players. Think of Blake Corum's run, in the end of the Rose Bowl there on the right side, or his catch and run on the right side, like mental lapse. And that didn't really happen in this game. So I guess that was a good thing. But again, the flashiest player is probably Okoronkwo, and that's a guy who on defense isn't really going to play this year. He just kind of was bumped up the depth chart because Campbell was out and then Jefferson was starting. So he's probably going to play on special teams this year, not on defense.
Right. No, and I think you make a fair point. Just it in the same way that maybe we're all reserving judgment on the offensive line, probably reserving a lot of judgment on the defense as a whole, just because they ran a lot of vanilla sets. They didn't really do anything exotic. We didn't really get to see a ton. Like they basically lined up in their positions and, do your best, kid. Right.
They blitzed out of that Husky spot a few times though, and that blew up a couple plays. I noticed that Red Morgan blitzed, I think against Lonergan. I want to say Devontae Smith did it once. So they were able to kind of get some pressure off the edge with some blitzes, but you're right. Overall, it wasn't all sorts of exotic alignments and blitzes and stunts and all that.
Yeah, which is probably by design because you want to save some of that stuff for, when the games actually count in August and September and whatnot. But, we were kind of talking about this before we hit record here. I was impressed. I liked watching Zabian Brown. I know that we had heard a lot about him. He was one of the 5-star defensive backs that was coming in. He wasn't really the same athlete that Jalen Mbakwe and Zay Mincy are, but just very technically sound, a guy that just seems to keep steadily rising. And, clearly we saw that, right? He got a lot of run with first team defense, the corner spot opposite Damani Jackson. He had a couple of impressive moments, right? Like I think he had a couple of pass breakups, one on a third down near the sideline. I think he had like another pressure coming in off the edge a little bit, or I don't even know if you'd count it as a pressure. But the one thing that kind of stuck out to me about Zabian Brown, because he did get beat a few times, right? Because Jeremy Bernard's pretty good. He wasn't ever beat because he was out of position. Like he was always there. He was always in position, and just, Bernard beat him over the top, or just, Bernard or Kobe Prentice or somebody had like a half step on him. Like he was always there in the position and just didn't always make the play. I liked that. Like I like a kid who's going to give his all to be there, and eventually the playmaking I think will come as long as he kind of continues with his development. But I thought that was kind of encouraging, right? Like even though the defense didn't show a whole lot, that probably helped a guy like Zabian Brown and really all the freshmen, guys like Red Morgan, Mbakwe, Mincy, even Drake Kirkpatrick had a nice moment, even though it was on a penalty, had that pick in the end zone. Running more vanilla defensive sets, like not really asking these guys to do a whole lot, probably made them think less and play more, right? So that probably helped. A guy like Zabian Brown, again, didn't flash, but he was always there. Like he was just in position, and it's just like, all right, the next step is to, play faster, and then you can start making plays on the ball. And so will we see that later in the fall? I don't know. But I thought that was kind of encouraging, like the fact that he's only been through, that was his 15th practice at Alabama. And it's like, okay, like he's there. He can do stuff, like, or I guess like the hope is that eventually because he's there, he will do stuff. So I don't know. Maybe that's, again, kind of a little thing, because again, the defense was kind of at a disadvantage all day, but I liked that. I don't know how you guys felt, but I liked that.
Not to turn a positive into a negative and jump ahead to the thing we didn't like about it, but like I felt good about, like you, I felt good about the fact that a freshman was in position to make plays, even if he didn't make them. It felt like the whole defense was kind of freshman in that moment, right? Like it felt like everybody was just kind of there, but wasn't ready to make the play. And I'm thinking back to the first big pass I think Jalen Milroe had down the left seam, and Malachi Moore got beat near the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
Malachi Moore got a terrible jump on that ball. And it just looked like he was thinking a little too much and wasn't just playing fast. And as good as I felt about the offense in terms of their functionality, in terms of the rhythm and all of those things, the defense just kind of always felt a little bit out of sorts, a little bit a half step behind. And maybe that's the function of the play calls, maybe, but it just didn't feel like there were guys out there just playing loose and playing athletically. And maybe that is just where they are right now. It is a new defense. Offense, a lot of guys are used to changing what they're able to do. Defenses, maybe a little bit more complicated, and you're shifting from a defense that was very rigid and very complicated in Nick Saban to something that's different under Kane Womack. So asking them to do different things in terms of, especially on the back end of the defense. So I was a little bit underwhelmed in terms of the speed and athleticism with which they played. They looked like they were trying to learn a new defense. And maybe that's okay in a spring game. That's not going to be okay if it looks like that week 1, week 2, week 3.
I think that's fair. Mike, what did you not like about the way the defense performed on A-Day?
Have I not gotten to that yet? I listened to many things there. There's a lot. And, I probably came out of the spring game less confident about the defense than I went into it with. Or at least less confident about the front seven, because I thought the front seven was going to be in a better spot than the secondary. I thought there was more continuity. I thought, players like Tim Keenan are pretty good, and maybe it helps, when they get Jaheim Otis back. We didn't see Jahad Campbell. But I just, again, that factor of having a guy like Will Anderson, having a guy like Dallas Turner be a game wrecker. I mean, even was it Middle Tennessee, I think 2 years ago, or Utah State. It was Utah State 2022. Like their entire game plan was around not letting Will Anderson blow them up in the backfield. They were getting rid of the ball within like 1 second every play. Like opposing teams plan around that stuff because of how disruptive those players are. Quandarius Robinson is not going to be that player for him. Jamarian Latham is not going to be that player for him. They're solid veteran players that are probably going to be in the right spot, but are not going to be difference makers. Keanu Cott has the chance, but it's his 4th year at this point. Like at what point we're going to see it? And they had that great recruiting class last year at outside linebacker with Pierre and Keeley, and that, through maybe nobody's fault singularly, is not really there yet. In the way that the Anderson and Drew Sanders class was, in the way that the Dallas Turner class was. They had a really good run of outside linebacker pass rushing recruiting here, and that was the basis of their defense. The biggest thing I think they did really well, along with the cornerback play, and neither of those are really there right now. Maybe Damani Jackson becomes that player at corner like we had, like we saw last year with Arnold and McKinstry, but they don't have it outside linebacker. And that's something that I think is going to be a sneaky storyline with this team if they're not getting that pressure early in the season here.
Yeah, I think go for it.
If they're having to manufacture it through the blitz and having to blitz their Husky to do it, that's going to be a problem too.
That's what I was going to get at, is not to give the full silver lining on everything, but I do think in the way that they can manufacture offense in terms of motions and those kind of things, this defense in particular, the 4-2-5, is well suited to bringing exotic looks. Now, ideally, you do it where you're not really blitzing in numbers, so your back end of your defense is still solid. They might have to do that and give up a little bit in terms of coverage, and that could be a scary proposition in terms of the secondary. But I do think that there's a way with this defense to kind of manufacture pressure. Ideally, you don't want to do that, but maybe that's the route they have to go because, quite frankly, a Will Anderson isn't supposed to come along every few years like Alabama's had luck with the Dallas Turner or Will Anderson on and on and on down the line. They just had those guys coming off a factory line for so long. So it's going to take some getting used to that it's different. Maybe somebody bubbles up, but if it doesn't, I think there are ways around it. It's just not the ideal route to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And having Keeley be one of their best recruits ever in terms of his rating coming out of high school. Now, again, we're a year in, and he's the third bandit on the roster. We're not sure if he's really going to see the field a lot on defense. Like, again, it's nobody's fault. It's not the previous coaching staff's fault. It's not the new coaching staff's fault. Maybe not Keeley's fault himself, but just it hasn't come along yet. And that's an issue for them because that was kind of, you can start pegging a guy like that in, I think, in his second year. A top 10 5-star recruit should be a pretty key player for you by his second year. Typically that's what happens, and just hasn't happened here.
Yeah, I think just along those same lines, the one thing I didn't like about the defense, and we've hit on it, is just nobody really popped. And again, part of that could be the caveat of like they played a vanilla defense. They weren't really trying to do a whole lot. They weren't trying to show a whole lot. But like you would still want the superstar athletes like a Keon Keeley, like an LT Overton who transferred in, Jamarian Latham, a guy who's been there, a Tim Keenan who emerged last year as kind of the middle, Keanu Cott. You want those guys to pop. And they had some moments, right? Like Jamarian Latham, I had down for a couple of pressures. LT Overton backed Formby up into the pocket and basically blew it up on a play. Keanu Cott had a play where he took 2 offensive linemen with him, and it resulted in a zero net gain for Jam Miller on a run. A couple of these guys had tackles for loss: James Smith, Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson, Okoronkwo. Like there were some things, but like nobody consistently like, oh my God, that's going to be a dude, right? Like that was the reaction I was hoping to have while watching the defense. And like, I just got done raving about Xavier Brown, but nobody really popped in the way that I hope to see it. And again, could be a product of just the fact that they just didn't want to do a whole lot defensively, but I wanted to see that. Like I wanted to see somebody just be like, oh, that's a different twitch than what we're used to seeing, or that's a little, even in such a vanilla based defense, I was hoping we'd see more of that, and we didn't. And that's a little bit of a bummer, and just kind of, like you guys were alluding to, a lot of questions still about the defense as we enter the summer. Hit on the offense, hit on the defense. Who was our MVP of the game, or who was your MVP of the game? Mike, I'll throw it to you.
I voted Jeremy Bernard because of those 2 catches early. I think Jan Miller won the award. He probably was more consistent, had the 2 touchdowns at the goal line. There wasn't really like an overwhelming MVP. Like you said, there was nobody on defense that really popped. Offensively, it was a little bit too disjointed with trying to cycle in all sorts of different teams. Like there was, I don't know if there's like snap counts on spring games, but I feel like there's more walk-ons that played in this game than I can remember in any of the previous spring games that I've covered, because they had a lot of those 3rd/4th teams with Mac in there. And there's, J.R. Gardner was getting a lot of carries. It just felt like there's more. I don't want to like dismiss walk-ons, but like in terms of what we do, it's probably garbage time because we're just not, there's not a lot of value in us watching and breaking down walk-on play. And so they're just, the sample size for like Milroe and Bernard and some of the key guys that we're going to see this season was still fairly small. And so that probably plays into not having like a true MVP, but Bernard was my pick. I think Miller's the other pick. I don't know if there's really anybody else that like truly deserves it.
I picked Miller. Alex, who did you pick?
Yeah, I went with Miller too. I really like Bernard. I wanted to just throw James Burnip out there just because he played as much as I did. But I mean, what are you going to do? I do think in terms of a guy who played really well, who didn't deserve the MVP by any means, but Richard Young, again, I just saw him and I was like, okay, that he's ready to play. Like that was a thing where it was just like, okay, if we got a breakout player, a guy you feel more confident about, him, but Simpson. But no, it's clearly it was Jeremy Bernard and Jam Miller, but with Jam, just the ability to have that 3 deep at the running back position, Justice Haynes being the other guy, felt really good about them for sure. I think he was a guy we heard a lot at this time last year, and it didn't materialize. But now I think he's going to have a lot more snaps, and I think the potential is there for him to be a really good player.
But will he play? That's the question with Richard Young. And I wonder if it was intentional too. The very first play of the game, DeBoer had both Miller and Haynes in the backfield, and he's been
21 personnel, baby.
which I don't think we saw again. But DeBoer's been very. He said it a few times, like he views them as 1A and 1B, like kind of as equals there. And I wonder if that was symbolic. So you want to have one who started the game and then one who didn't. I wonder if there's a little bit of meaning behind that. And yeah, Richard Young, if you told me like he probably could be starting for an FBS program somewhere this year, he's not going to get a lot of carries behind Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. He's going to get some, but not a lot. And what does he do if he feels like he's shown enough this spring to be starting this fall somewhere, and you have two guys ahead of you at Alabama and two guys who, like Haynes, still has another year of college left after this? What does Richard Young do? That's one sneaky one to watch for me, because again, I think he showed a lot, and I think he has ability to be playing more than what he's going to be playing this year at Alabama.
I'll tell you what Richard can do is get really good at catching the football, because I'm serious. He's a power runner, but if he can become a guy out of the backfield and become a third down type back, I mean, they might need him to do that. But you're right. He is in a little bit of a squeeze in terms of the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
What was our favorite play from A-Day, if we have one? Mike, I'll start with you again.
Ty Simpson spinning out of the sack. I thought they should have given that to him. I thought that was a touchdown. Yeah, he's wearing a black jersey. I think it was Xavier Brown on the outside. Didn't really want to touch him.
Yes, it was. The boy set the edge.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that was a touchdown. I thought he made the play there. So I don't know. I'll go with that. I'll go with Ty Simpson's touchdown, and he got taken away by the powers that be. Just like we had Alex taken away here. Oh, there he is. We lost your connection there.
I think he's struggling. He's struggling with the off right
here, apparently.
Oh, that's all right.
For a minute.
Well, just hang on long enough to finish our show, and then you can do whatever you want after.
Big time allergies. While he deals with that, my favorite play, I think, was the 54-yarder or 52-yarder to Jeremy Bernard, like real big. The beginning of the game from Jalen Milroe. What I liked a lot of the little things about it, because like Milroe, like play action, and he backed up, and he kind of the pocket kind of formed around him, like just based on whatever the specific assignment was. But like Milroe stayed in the pocket. I liked that. He delivered a really nice ball. I liked that. He kind of dropped it into Bernard over Brown. I liked that Brown was there, but Bernard just made a better play. Maybe he pushed off a little bit, whatever. But then Bernard was able to catch it and do a lot of stuff after the catch too. Another kind of quiet thing that I liked about that was Jaron Hamilton, another receiver who, probably not going to hear much about, or maybe buried a little bit on the depth chart. Downfield blocking to kind of spring Bernard for another 10 yards or so. Like there was just a lot about that play that I liked, just from the snap, the pre-throw, the throw, the way Milroe was able to step into the throw while standing in the pocket, and then Bernard able to get the catch and do some stuff afterwards. Like there was just a lot to like about that one. And I know it's easy to pick the explosive play, but it wasn't just the explosiveness of the play. It was a lot of the little things that led to the play being explosive, if that makes sense. Alex, if you aren't dead yet, what was your favorite play from A-Day?
I mean, allergies are real. I don't know what's going on right now.
Same thing here.
It's bad. But in terms of plays, I think just the explosive running plays, seeing Jam Miller sprint down a sideline and get free, especially the way they were able to run between the tackles. Going back to the play you said you singled out, Cody, the touch that Milroe put on that pass was perfect. And that was right. That's the intermediate thing that we've sort of been waiting for him to do. Now, can he build upon that and complete more of those passes? I think that's the key to him becoming a better football player. But seeing the burst out of a Jam Miller was really interesting. On the, I think the one play down the left sideline, he really broke free. It was a good play to see.
That was good. That was good. I like that too. Finally, here we'll wrap it up with one question that we all have moving forward out of A-Day and spring ball. Alex, I'll throw it to you so you can get it in before you die from a coughing fit again. What's one question you've got about Alabama as we move forward into the summer months?
How many of these guys are still going to be around, and who are going to be the new guys? I mean, it's obvious, right? It felt like the spring game was a dress rehearsal and an audition at the same time. Like, who are going to be the guys who are capable of making plays? Who are the guys who don't fit stylistically, right? The guys who went through the spring to see what it looked like under Kalen DeBoer, and then who becomes available in the portal, because I think that is more important than anything. Is there guys worth going after in the secondary? Are there guys worth going after at wide receiver? Is there a pass rusher out there? So I think that to me remains the biggest question is we don't think at all by any means this is a finished product for the Alabama football roster, but how much does it change during the course of the next 2 weeks?
Mike, do you concur with that, or what's your biggest question coming out of A-Day?
Yeah, I agree with him. I think who is still here because, like, I would not be surprised if we are surprised by a departure through the portal. Like, there's probably going to be a player that leaves that we weren't expecting because there always is. Like, that's just the nature of the portal. And then does that create a new hole that they have to fill? And the same thing, like Alex said, we say like they can find somebody through the portal. Like there's just players falling from the sky and they're going to pick Alabama. And it doesn't always work that way either. And they're like, everybody wants an offensive tackle. Like if they don't grow on trees, like that's always a need for every team. You know, a lot of teams want corners. Like, again, and you might have to pay up. So it's easier said than done. So which players become available, which players leave, what does this roster look like on August 1st compared to April 15th is really the biggest thing that matters right now.
I mean, shoot, what does it look like, May 1st compared to what it looks like now on April 15th? I think that's the obvious big question. I think I'm going to agree with you guys there because as much as I loved rewatching A-Day, there's a lot of dudes that we saw play and get snaps on Saturday that will not be here as soon as tomorrow, right? We're recording this on a Monday. The transfer portal opens for the spring window on Tuesday, April 16th. It'll be open through the 30th. But we're going to see a lot of movement, not just through this week, but really I think through, the rest of April, May, June, even July, as these kids try to figure out where they want to go, where do they fit in, who's leaving, who's going, and we'll be keeping track of all of that. Bama247.com. Guys, any other final thoughts before we sign off here?
One sneaky big question is who's going to be the place kicker, but
yes,
that did not play out the way we thought it would. So I'm very curious to see how Connor Talty holds off those two walk-ons.
It's a very good point. We saw 3 different kickers kick extra points, and then Talty got the one, or I guess they had 2 field goal attempts, and Talty missed his one from 47 yards, which, to be fair, it's pretty good distance, but also, like, you're supposed to be the dude, right?
Nobody's going to know Reed Schuback's name until he's lining up to kick a game-winning field goal in Tiger Stadium, November 8th or whatever it is. Like, people are going to know his name pretty quickly, either way, one way or the other in that one.
That's a good point here to sign off with. That's all we've got today. Recapping A-Day and Alabama spring ball. We'll be back probably sometime later this week to recap a lot of the initial movement in the transfer portal. We're expecting a lot of movement from Alabama and other schools really through the first couple of days this week. Again, portal opens on Tuesday. We'll be back sometime Thursday or Friday to kind of recap, who's coming, who's leaving, who's going, all that sort of stuff, because it's going to be a lot to keep track of. So we're going to do our best. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. Believe we're still running a deal because we're always running a deal. We might have a portal deal coming up, but right now the deal is 30% off an annual VIP membership. Something like $50 for the entire year. You should absolutely take advantage of that to get all of our great insight at Bama247.com. We appreciate you guys listening. Alex and Mike, appreciate you guys jumping on the pod with us. We will talk to you all again soon.